Thank you to Mostafis for arranging this event and for all the sponsors. I know a lot of work has gone into this, and there's a lot of hope that this is a benefit to everybody. So transparency is a subject which has been a big part of my life for a long time. So before we start the session, I just want to put a little bit of it in context. And I guess the first thing that I'd like to say about it is that we as consumers, even in this room, basically everything on your table, everything around you, every single product that you run into in your life, you basically know nothing about it. We don't know where it's made. We don't know who worked on it, under what conditions. We don't know where it came from. We know basically nothing about everything. And so this is not just in the apparel industry, but this is in every industry, whether it's this clock here or the camera this gentleman is using. We trust the brands because it's a certain brand name. We believe that it's done ethically and that there's some sort of veracity in the production. But the fact of the matter is we don't know anything. So today we're going to talk about transparency. The second thing that I think is really important to note is where we're going from a consumer market. And where we're going is that in the near future, a consumer will be able to scan any product anywhere. And through that scanning of their QR code, they're going to be able to see the entire supply chain. They're going to be able to see all of the documentation behind the production of it, all of the certifications, even the shipping bill of ladings. Every single piece of information will be available to the consumer in the near future. So transparency is not a very kind of vague subject. This is something where all of consumer goods is going and where all of us are going to have to participate in it. So from that point, we have questions. We're going to try to do this in 3 groups. The first group of questions I'm going to ask is going to be on really what is transparency and have everyone explain what it is, but we'll go through their different questions, but the context will be that. The second question of what are the problems in getting there? And then the third thing will be the solutions of how we get there, because it's coming. So my first question is to Mr. Mamoon. As one of the key leaders of transparency movement in Bangladesh, can you explain how the Bangladesh apparel industry as a whole is investing resources for building a transparent culture? And also if you could explain what you think transparency is. To you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer to arrange such a wonderful event and give us the opportunity to tell our first-hand experience from the industry. Actually, first of all, the entrepreneur of garment industry in Bangladesh did a gigantic job for sustainable and transparent issue. For last 5-6 years or 7 years, the work has been done. It's unbelievable. It's my point of view, it's a revolutionary work has been done. And some of the cases, it not been recognized also. The work, when we started, we don't know where is the end. Still, all the factories, owners, took it very positive frame of mind. And the money we spend, the money we borrow from the bank for transform our industry with a high interest rate, it shows that our intention to be in the business for long term. Transparency is not a one-party case. It should be jointly. It should be organized jointly, and the belief of the tri-party, I must say, the manufacturer, the buyers, and the government should be very strong. Sometime when authorities came to the factory and shows their intention to fix it up, that should be some prediction. sometimes it's become unpredictable for the factory owner. That's what situation they will be in. And that confusion sometimes make owner to think a different way. But what I believe, the way we become transparent in Bangladesh, it is first of all our full intention to make this industry transparent, to open to the world, because we believe this is the way we can be sustainable. And I believe this journey will continue, but I will ask, and I will not tell that this is only a one-party job. I will ask to contribute along with manufacturer to achieve our goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zahir, how do you create and how do you get a larger take-up of transparency in the industry? Yeah, and do you want to also explain what you think it is from the entire supply chain point of view?
Hi. Yeah, so I think today, what we talk about transparency, first, let's just go through, what the understanding is it's the way garments are purchased, from the retailer or the brands to where they're placing the business and where it's sourced from and going to the roots of it, basically, right? So, and within the supply chain, what we are talking about today is actually sharing that information to outright to the consumers who are purchasing the products. So that means we have to come up with an ecosystem which kind of shows all that. A lot of it was already there probably, to some extent. The factory has been always been getting audited. And to some extent, the people who have been buying, they would have some sort of control over it. But now we're talking about a system, an ecosystem where we want to actually kind of bring it out to the end consumers and make this transparency even more clearer. So how it has evolved is, this has been there for the food industry and other industries we've seen. For fashion, it's become a kind of a requirement, a demand from the consumers. They want to know actually where their products are being made. And I think it's the future. It's quite disruptive in the sense that we can solve a lot of the supply chain problems through this. So I think it is something that's good for the industry as well as for the manufacturers actually. So me being a manufacturer, the idea is yeah, okay, you are one of the suppliers in the world and one of the many suppliers to the brand. But now this is actually giving you the opportunity to come front and kind of be representing yourself. So if your information is out there on the web and the consumer actually knows which factory the product is coming from, so we are talking about a different level of opportunity for the manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So this is what we need to kind of make use of. So through the online systems of of selling products, this has become more easier through the we talked about the RFID readers and all. So a consumer who's buying can actually make a wise choice. So that gives a lot of leverage to the manufacturer. So as a manufacturer, I think we must make the use of it. As a Bangladeshi manufacturer, we have come a long way. So we have made substantial improvements in the last 6 years, especially on the compliance, on the safety measures. But for us, it's very important to share that with the world. And again, capitalize that basically. So we've done the investments. I think the country has spent over $3 billion in these fire safety equipments and upgrading the factories. So it's time for us to kind of capitalize on that. And a good way to do that is through the transparency. So the more I look at it, I think, I see this as an opportunity. So when we talk about transparency, we talk about the cost of production, for example. Now, a lot of these buyers, some of them have done really well, these online companies like Epyllion and so they're saying okay, this is the cost for me to purchase the product and this is what I'm selling at, right? So when we do that exercise, again, I think we manufacturers can voice out a lot of our problems. So a lot of the brands are actually, unless they're private, they're public companies, right? So their reports are annually published. So we know exactly how much profit they're making. So we've been noticing, like, so even like point, quarter, something change in the profit leads to, like, firing of the CEO and like a huge hue and cry, right? So it's a big matter. The profit is a big matter for everyone. And the growth is also a big matter. So what about the manufacturers? So now, so if we, like, so we are talking about like a $20 billion business making a double-digit profit, right? It's good, it's excellent, it's fashion industry. We have some of the richest people in the world, actually, from the fashion industry. So now what about the manufacturer? Have we asked the question, okay, in this product category, is our brands asking that question, can you please be transparent and show us your balance sheet? Are you making money or not? Because if you're not making money, then the business is not sustainable. We could not care. I mean, if you're not making money, there will be another supplier coming up and, like, offering you the product. So I think, again, like, part of sustainability is kind of opening that up. You share your cost, and let's come up with an acceptable margin. So if a manufacturer is entitled to, like, if not a double digit, what is it? Is it like 7%, 8% in your product category? So why don't we show if we are making that? And all this cry, hue and cry that the manufacturers are doing, I think that's what we are talking about, right? So these days with the cost increases, our ends, like, the margins have shrunk to a level where it's not sustainable for us to continue business as well as invest in technology, invest in innovation, invest in design. So I think, again, through this transparency, we as manufacturers must make use of it and share. There's nothing wrong in sharing. There's nothing wrong in profit. There's nothing wrong in sustaining. So yeah, this is my message.
Thank you. Sabine, from your journalistic point of view and your global experience, where's transparency at today around the world? Where do you see it?
Well, I would say, for me, it's been like, I'm in the journalistic business for about 20 years. So it's been, I would say, a rather frustrating experience. Because to make things transparent and to get information out to the readers, to the people, I wouldn't say that it has become more easy, just the other way around. Because the thing is, if you ask for transparency, I think it's one of those catchwords like sustainability, authenticity, stuff like that. What does it actually mean? Nobody knows, and nobody defines it. So it can be anything different for any company. And I think it doesn't really help to be transparent if you are not comparable. So what we tried, just one example to show this, where this frustration comes from, about 1.5 years ago, to ask different mills to tell us, for example, how much water they need, how much whatever energy they need to produce 1 meter of denim. They wouldn't answer. Most of them just didn't answer the question. And we told them in advance, listen, we want to make like a kind of tabloid where we want to make things comparable. So it was all transparent from our side what the intention of the article was. Many of them didn't answer, some didn't answer in time, some would give like different numbers that you cannot compare in the end again. So our try to make things more transparent, I must say, didn't work out at all. We're still working on it, but I don't have the feeling yet that the industry or anybody in this fashion industry is really willing to be transparent. And one last remark, I think transparency doesn't come from what you as a company decide. You're transparent if I ask you something, whatever I want to know, and then you tell me what it's all about. It's not what you offer me.
Okay. Mr. Bekke, with your International Apparel Federation, how do you see transparency around the world? Where is it? Where are we stand?
Well, if you ask people in our business whether they need standardization of codes of conduct, of transparency, of size indication, or audits, everybody would say, yes, we need it. But the situation is chaos. I call it the Frank Sinatra approach. I did it my way. Is that bad? No, I don't think so, because our sector is in transition. And huge steps are made, also in this country, but it is not in a harmonized way. We are a sector in transition, and I think by cooperation we have to work to a certain kind of standardization. Transparency is asked because of the huge pressure on our sector from governments, from press, from NGOs, from consumers. We are seen as the most polluting industry in the world. Whether that's true or not, whether we are number 1 or 8, the framing is there, and I think to some extent it's true. So we have a challenge there to improve our sustainability. Transparency can be very helpful because you disclose what you're doing as a company in all parts of the supply chain. And this pressure is there, this burden is there, so we have the responsibility to work on that. Transparency can be helpful, but I see different developments based on the size of a company in different countries. The heat is more on in some countries than in others. Some people here in the Far East think it's a non-trade barrier that we invest, for instance, in Europe a lot in transparency. That has come together, but it's a long way to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Mehra, can you talk about how you see transparency? And if you don't mind, can you also grow the supply chain to, for instance, to the farm and all the way through where there's workers involved?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's been really helpful to hear the perspectives of the panelists, and I want to say to Sharif's point, I absolutely agree. I think what your points are really elaborating is that transparency is both a tool and an end result. And in the context of a tool, what it really does is democratize the supply chain. So it allows different elements in the supply chain to be able to take information and leverage it the way they need to. So I think it's a really powerful, powerful way of creating that sort of shared regulation around the supply chain. I think the other thing, in terms of the specific work in the apparel supply chain, a lot of the momentum around transparency was focused around the apparel and footwear supply chain transparency pledge that got off the ground in about 2017, when civil society groups and labor groups came together to demand over 70 brands disclose to the first tier information about their supply chains. So I think what you saw there was a common recognition that having public disclosure in a comparable format of factory names, locations, numbers of workers, parent company information was really valuable in being able to advocate for the reforms that are needed in the sector as a whole. But that stopped at the first tier. And to your point about the evolution of transparency and the journey in the sector, I think we will see increased calls and focus to move beyond that first tier into raw material sourcing, the spinning mills, and I think this should be seen as an expectation of responsible business conduct under international frameworks like the United Nations Guiding Principles. The expectation is businesses ought to know and to show how they're engaging with respect for human rights, including labor rights. So again, I don't think the transparency journey is finished. I think we very much have begun the journey, and I think through efforts of suppliers and manufacturers themselves to see the value in it and to go down their supply chains themselves and be transparent, you'll start to see sort of a turning point.
Thank you. Sabine, my next question to you is, what can you do, or what can the press do to push this forward?
Well, I think you just used the right word. We need to push more. I think we need to, if we have the manpower, of course, to try to investigate and really push the companies to publish their numbers and whatever we want to know. And I think, first of all, again, I would come back to the point saying that if we want to find out, or if we want to be want to know more about transparency, first we would have to ask our readers, so what do you want to know? What is transparent in, what kind of numbers do you need from the mills, for example, from the manufacturers? And of course then again ask the retailers, what do you need to know from the brand side? And the problem still is that I think, yeah, maybe times have improved, but I think I don't see transparency happening in that sense, you know. So for me, again, it's like more like a frustrating experience over the years. And it's not that I've given up, but it's, you would not get the numbers you're requesting. You just don't get them. And it's pretty difficult, as we all know, you know, just travel to any country, enter any facility. It's not possible. They won't let you in, you know. So it's, you have to, in the end, you just have to believe what you receive. And that's a question of trust. And I mean, if we talk trust, we all know that this is a pretty different matter.
And we're back to knowing nothing about everything. Mr. Zahir, can I ask you a question? Do you believe that there should be global standards for transparency? Is that where we're going, where there's actually like a standard for all products that go into a garment?
Yeah, of
Chemicals,
course.
everything?
Yeah, I think when you come up with a good idea, good initiative, the best way to spread it is through actually standardization. It becomes easy because when you're dealing with so many manufacturers and people are trying to learn, so I think it's easier if we can kind of show the way to do it. So in the industry, we've already seen like tools like, for example, the Higgs Index, which talks about the compliance part and the sustainability part. So we're all complying that. So, and we are sharing the information, right? We've gone through this whole Accord Alliance initiative. And what is it actually? So you can access those information on the web and you can exactly see the factory and the status of the factory. So this is transparency, what we're talking about. There's been a lot of initiative on the denim sector. Companies have come up with scoring your scores on the environmental impact. So we're actually developing products, based on that score. So these
Does that include the raw materials as well?
Sorry?
Does that include the raw materials as well?
Yes. So even when the chemicals that we are buying, there is a certain score to that, right? The MSDS and what we talk about. So these have kind of evolved over the years, and I think it's been tremendous. It makes it easy for our life as a manufacturer to kind of go and source it from the right places. I don't see any. I mean, we've actually honestly built beautiful factories, and we've invested a lot in these factories. So why not showcase those and promote those? So I think it's the right cause and right way to do it. Of course, there's a cost to it, and when I'm representing the manufacturers, I will be talking about the cost. And so as long as we can kind of pay for that, and I personally feel there's a lot of inefficiencies in the supply chain. I mean, the way these brands source with importers, with global offices here, there, you increase the cost. I know of a company here who has almost 500 people. And I love that company. I mean, they're my best friend. But yeah, you need 500 people to run a sourcing company. I mean, make it trim, make it leaner. I mean, cut down the costs. And then pay that additional cost to the factories or to the workers or whatever it is. So I think together, if you can cut down the inefficiencies in sourcing, you can actually start, paying for all these additional initiatives all across. And the online business is kind of showing that directly to you. They are paying higher. They are offering good prices. They are offering. So it's kind of like you have to modernize your entire supply chain system to come up with that.
Thank you. Mr. Mamoon, how do you encourage more factories to go the transparent road? What do you suggest the industry should do here?
Money.
Money.
If you pay rightly, they will feel encouraged to be more transparent. If you feel that I will cut down rest of the fat from the factory and ask factory to be more transparent, because we are here for business, to be very honest. We all are here for business. So transparency is not a one-part game. It's a both-part game. So one side, only factory will be transparent, and how far transparent you need. I need to keep my clothes on. If you ask me to open, I can't, because I'm doing business. So I have my own recipe. So sometimes it's happened that the customer wants to know my recipe. So how can I be transparent in that case? I cannot be transparent, because everybody got here their own recipe to make their food. So if I am running a restaurant and a customer come and ask that what is your recipe, the restaurant people will never tell you and allow me to be transparent. So that is encouragement, as you said that. So the manufacturer needs some encouragement that whatever they desire, you should give them. It's not intention. If intention was like that, that's I like to push manufacturer to be transparent, to get his all fat, or to get his all secret. So that should not be the wisest way. Transparency always a good tool to be a sustainable. And I like to be a transparent, but not the cost of my business. So that is the buyers and other stakeholders should understand. So that is my answer to your question.
Perfect. Mr. Bekke, for your association, what do you plan or what can you do in the future to push the case of transparency throughout the world and in Bangladesh?
We think that the OECD guidelines for due diligence are a perfect basis for improvement. It's at the heart of initiatives like in the Netherlands and in Germany. And we feel as IF that these guidelines are a perfect tool to improve transparency. We reach out to other associations like SAC. They developed the HIC index, but the HIC index is developed mainly for big companies. The reality is that the size of our industry is, in all countries, small and medium sized. So we reach out to SAC to see how we can transfer the HIC index into a size that it's also workable for smaller and medium sized companies. We will take the initiative with our membership, like BGMEA in Bangladesh or the Turkish Clothing Manufacturers Association, our Vietnamese member, so the big producing countries, to see how we can improve the transparency in our industry based on best practices and see whether we could come to standardization. Because, as I said, it's fragmented and that costs money. And what we should do is try to lower the cost in our sector. At the same time, I feel that in the supply chain, the investments that companies, manufacturers are making to improve should be respected. I think that I'm working in this business for 47 years now. Price is killing our fashion business. And I feel that fashion business is killing its own business because of this constantly pressure on prices. And we teach the consumers that everything is cheap. Now, to change that and to change consumer behavior is something we are talking about with universities in Holland, the country where I'm living, and where the Secretariat of IF is, to see how you can change also consumer behavior in the climate discussion, but especially also for apparel, because we teach the consumers in the wrong way. Honestly.
Let me ask all of you the question then. Do you believe that if in your market, like in the United States or in Europe, if the consumer had a breakdown of what everything really cost, would they pay more?
Sorry, could you repeat the last thing again? Sorry.
If the consumer had a breakdown of what products really cost, would they pay more?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they pay more. Because I think we always underestimate the psychological effect. Of course, if you ask people in the street, would you pay more for this and that pair of jeans? They would all answer, I would answer, yeah, of course I would, because I'm a good person. But you know, when the sales are... Everybody awake now, no? But I think if you go to a store and if you have the chance to get something cheaper for a cheaper price, something that you like a lot, of course you would go for the cheaper thing and not even asking about the price. So I think it really depends on what situation you catch the consumer.
Do you want to answer that?
I mean, I don't really enjoy getting into the sort of the consumer psychology aspects of this, because I think it also is a sort of a pass the buck, right? Like this notion that, we are waiting for the consumer to tell us what we ought to do differently about how we govern a supply chain in this sector. I think consumers will be different depending on where they are, segmented based on their age, their characteristics, etc. So it's hard to consider a monolith of a consumer. But I do want to pivot, if you would permit, onto some of the questions that I think were sort of unpacked over the past couple days. I thought it was really interesting to hear some of the statistics yesterday about manufacturers who had implemented programs or efforts like transparency or supply chain reform, and then to actually see a lack of that being rewarded by their buyers. And I think that to me is fundamental to solving the problem of progressing reforms in the supply chain, is the disconnect between incentives. So if you're investing so much in things like transparency and other labor rights protections, why are the buyers not sticking with you, funding that? That to me is the problem that we're all facing here.
I was going to add to that. I mean, it doesn't have to be the consumers themselves. But through this process, what we can say is like, kind of make everyone responsible. So if you if you have the cost breakdown and if you kind of show that someone in the supply chain is making a lot more profit than the other, it could kind of put that shame or kind of that responsibility. So I think that's what the goal would be. Like some consumers would care, and these young consumers are kind of conscious about the environment and about the impact. So I think this process will kind of help in making people responsible. So what was happening before is so a lot of these brands used to have unknown sources of supplies, and they would be sourcing from risky places. And even today that's happening actually. And there are some countries which are actually kind of risky. And they don't have that transparency as we do. So, and our neighbors, so I don't want to point out the name. But then through this process, we can actually show that, look, we are doing the right practices and someone else is not, and our prices should be fairer. And look, I mean, price and supply, it's such a thing that, at the end of the day, we have to negotiate. We have to kind of work it out with our customers. So we can't keep on just talking about it, but it's a way of how to do it, how to do a better negotiation.
So I have a question for you. I've been in the business a long time, and when I was a little boy, products made in Japan were generally considered as inferior products. They broke and they were shabby. And Japan went through an enormous change where today quality in Japan is considered the best in the world. Isn't it to Bangladesh's benefit to actually be the first to endorse and promote? Isn't this a chance for you to rebrand and step out of the shadow of any other country and really be excellent in something?
Exactly. So
is this an individual? And then the second part of the question is it a factory by factory initiative, or is it a national desire? Because Japan, when they changed, it was a national mission. It wasn't factory by factory. In fact, factories that didn't comply were reported to the government. And the government stepped in and took the responsibility of excellence. Is this not your moment?
So since December actually, so I got in the board of BGMEA recently, so it's been 4 months. We've seen 60 factories getting shut down. And again, essentially it's mainly because of the safety and compliance reasons. So we are serious. And I think the brands are serious. So Bangladesh, like I said, has actually gone through that step in the last 6 years. So we have kind of eliminated a lot of those non-compliant factories. And then the practices of the factories in terms of how to deal with the workers and your organization, that obviously has to improve a lot more. But then like I said, once it's been filtered out, then it's to your benefit to kind of showcase and be transparent.
Can I ask you, again, I'm stepping in here, but have you seen a benefit for the investments that you've made in going transparent and setting up these reforms in the system here?
Look, I mean, some things you can't make compromises. On safety matters, you can't make compromise, right? So, I mean, see what happened in the industry, back in the 80s, it was more like a cottage industry. So the industry kind of grew without a plan, without proper investments. So it was time to kind of correct that, and so we kind of had those accidents and incidences which we all know of, right? So you can't make a compromise on safety and workers' welfare and issues like that, right? So then after that, what we're trying to do now, the industry runs in a certain way, and you have to be kind of going along that same way. So if the industry is talking about sustainability, it's talking about impacts, it's talking about your workers, so you can't kind of ignore that. So if you are a front runner, if you want to be we are at the second position after China, but then there's a huge gap, huge difference, right? So that's again an opportunity. So if you want to do it the right way, then I think this is the right way. And you will be paid off. I mean, supply chain will balance itself, there will be some shutdowns, but eventually people will need clothes. It's still very labor-oriented, and I don't see too many competition coming up. So in the next 10 years, if we are responsible, if we are transparent, I think definitely we can, reap the benefit of that.
All right, can everybody, we'll start with you, Sabine, can everyone make wrap-up comments about whatever you want to talk about that we haven't covered or should cover here, that our audience might want to consider?
First of all, I would like to thank you, Mr. Al-Mamoon, for saying, because I think it was very honest when you said that the transparency level you follow goes up to the point where it affects your business, which I think is very true. It might not be liked by everybody, but I think that's just the reality. I think when it comes to money in the end, then of course maybe everybody would, be a bit more tied up and closed up about unveiling whatever numbers they have. So yeah, I think that's actually the main point. This is the trust matter again. Do I believe what people tell me? Do I trust in what they say? And it's very nice that some brands on their website now tell us what companies they are producing it. So, and then what's next? Do I think I travel there and check that myself if that's a good company or a bad one? So I think this word transparency, I think I would like to get more facts about it, more definition. Do we all have the same idea of what transparency means? Is it like unveiling all the numbers you have, or is it just the numbers you want to unveil? So for example, how much do you earn every month? Would you like to tell me? Maybe not. Yeah, would you? No, you personally? You would, okay, great. But I think,
But they can't, I think it's public domain. It could be eventually public domain to talk about how much energy you use and how much water you use and how many units you get for that. I think those are compelling pieces of information.
Yeah, but again, you have to make it comparable. I think that we need all different companies to tell us, and then we can say, oh, this one is a good one and this one is a worse one.
Yes.
Otherwise it doesn't make sense. But this is what I said in the beginning in this example. We tried to make it comparable. It was not possible. We wouldn't get the data.
Mr. Bekke.
I see where in the past the focus was on social compliance. I see a shift towards environmental footprint. And I guess that legislation will force us to improve. The new European Commission is working on a European, European standard of system of product environmental footprint calculation. IEF is involved in that, SAC is in that, Eurotax, the European Association. It could be a standard for globally. It indicates that we, apart from social compliance, I see a huge pressure on our environmental footprint, and that means transparency as well. It means also, in my view, that we have to rethink our business model. Circularity is one of circularity, and not waste management, but circular design, circular thinking is something that is already running in some countries to see how we can reuse, probably refuse, and say, why do we need 8 collections or 9 collections? Although I think that fast fashion can be very sustainable if you produce it close to the market. And I see new startups, for instance, in European countries, trying to work on that model. But they don't get the investment because we're not ranking top for investors. I see also a huge pressure from private equity companies to be more sustainable. So if you like it or not, we cannot escape. We have to improve.
Mr. Mehra.
Now, the transparency you want, and sustainability we want, and the retailer give us a suggestion, and we invested. Now, the benefit goes to retailer. So that is not a motivation. So if we can share the benefit, that is the motivation. So that is, it's not, I can guarantee you, no manufacturers want that only we will make profit, because we know if my retailer doesn't make money, my business will be stopped. So, but we also need to survive. So definitely, as you ask, that's all these changes, all this effort, all these sustainable things will benefit. Yes, it's benefit the manufacturers as a manufacturers, but financially, the benefit goes to other part. So what we want, a share, the right share with a retailer. So that is what all manufacturers want.
Sure. Just to say in closing, I think what's obvious about this discussion is that while there's been attention placed on the apparel sector at the brand level, a lot of that has been sort of pushed down to supplier responsibility. And I think what's interesting as we look at increased demands for transparency, both from consumers, from regulators, from investors, is we should start asking more about the purchasing practices and the ways that brands and others are engaging with their suppliers, and call for transparency on those sorts of measures as well.
All right, in wrapping up, I would just say that I'm super optimistic about this because the rhetorical questions are always more interesting than the actual question. Is if brand A is completely transparent and brand B is not, the rhetorical question is why are they not? And the answers are not good. One is that they don't want to be, or two, they don't know. So I feel like once one brand does it successfully and more and more are coming, then we're going to end up in that way, and there'll be money for all the supply chain to do that. Anyway, thank you very much.